Okay, the fourth part of chapter 5 looks at logical operations. And we mentioned these earlier that we'd keep getting into ands and ors eventually. Now we have them here. And we're going to look at the syntax for that. Might be a little different than you've seen before just to fit in a programming language. So if we want to say something and something else, we use the ampersand sign, which kind of makes sense, but we have to do it twice, ampersand, ampersand. And the or, we use these vertical lines. You might have to look on the keyboard. So the ampersand is above 7 usually. And the vertical lines is usually on most keyboards like above the enter key, shift, above like the backslash. So make sure you find out where this is and get used to it. And the last thing we'll look at, and I mentioned this I think earlier in the chapter, is that the exclamation point starts means not. So we can talk about not equals or not something else, and then we can actually stick that with other things. So again, here these A and B's are just already logical expressions. So they're just stand-ins for logical expressions. So we might say if x is less than 7 and x is greater than 10 or something like that. So each one of these A's and B's are logical expressions that we work with. So here are some examples again. If the age is greater than 16 and the age is less than 25. And here we're using the same variable on both sides, but we can use different variables. We generally put parentheses around these because we'll see later precedence is kind of strange with these, so it's a good habit to always use parentheses to set up. So each one of these statements has to be true or false when we write this. And again, you can't avoid some starting students often write if age is less than 16 and less than 25. You can't, this has to be a standalone expression. You can't just assume the age from over here. You have to have and age is less than 25 over here also. So okay, so go through these exercises, see if you can interpret them, ands and ors, and work with that now. And then again, this is not equals, and this is not of a whole expression. So again, if the whole expression is true, the not makes it false. If the whole expression is false, the not makes it true. So not just makes it the opposite of it. So that's not this whole thing. So we would say like, if it's not true that the number of people is greater than 10 and the number of cars is greater than 2. Okay, so walk through these. These are some more expressions, and here you'll be writing some of your own. And again, notice here when we say the days is like we're checking in a range. We want the number of cars to be greater than 0 but less than 100. We have to write max cars greater than 0 and max car is less than 100. But we can't just say max car is greater than 0 and less than 100. We have to write it as two separate expressions with an and, in this case an and, sometimes an or in between them. So get used to these, practice these out. These are good exercises to practice out running ands and ors. And remember, once you get used to it, you'll start reading this is or and this is and all the time. So good practice to get you used to that. We also introduced this Boolean type. We can declare a variable to store a Boolean value. It can be either true or false. So we can say things like, we can say result equals true or result equals something that's true or false as we go. And so that sometimes that introduces errors, but this becomes a powerful tool later on when we do more complicated code to be able to store the results of these comparisons or these true false values as a data type. And we call that Boolean. So now we have all our operators now, and we can talk a little bit about precedence. If you don't have parentheses, what goes first? And so you're used to some of these, and this table isn't the greatest, but it should be broken up. Multiplication and division and mod are higher precedence than plus and minus. So this should actually be broken up into two parts. They do mention that these operators are evaluated using precedence for these operators. So these are actually higher precedence for these. And most tables will break these up into two lines. So we kind of know that. The comparisons are broken off here. So we generally do the multiplication and divisions and stuff first, and then we do these. But again, we usually want to just make sure and put parentheses in here. And so the parentheses have the highest precedence because we always will do those first. So again, we usually will try to write all these lines with parentheses in them. Uh, Again, not is done really early. It was before anything else. So if you're ever using not and you're not using parentheses, it's probably not going to do what you want it to do. And then there's other things. The ands and the ors are way down here. And the ordering of these is not necessarily left to right and stuff like that. So if you're writing these complex expressions out, it probably won't be doing what you want it to do unless you stick in these parentheses to force it to do what you want. So like here they want this happening first, this and happening, and then have parentheses around all that, and then they want it compared to this. Now there are two other, there's a single and a single or, and these do things you probably don't understand and don't ever want to use, at least anytime soon. They're called bitwise and bitwise ors, and they're there. And so if you have a number, you can convert it to a bunch of zeros and ones, and then you can do bitwise operations on those zeros and ones of two numbers, each bit one at a time. And again, we won't be doing anything with those in this class. So always use the double ands and the double or the double vertical lines for your work. Okay, so again, walk through this. Oops, my newest video, my last video just posted to YouTube, so that's good. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so go through these, do these participation activities, getting used to this sort of stuff, and the precedence here. Sometimes this is confusing, and again, I think the easiest way to get around this confusion here, like trying to figure out which this does, is simply to force yourself to always use parentheses when we're doing this. But again, we have to be careful when we use parentheses because sometimes with an not, we want a parenthesis around the whole thing also. So they'll try to trick you into some of these statements and try to say what's going to work. So just work through these and it will convince you that you should be always using parentheses because you'll be amazed how often you get these wrong without putting parentheses in there. So go through these and then jump down if you want to try the challenge activities, work on those. I actually think the challenge activities are easier in this chapter than these. These always confuse me, and again, I'm always the one to advocate using lots of parentheses to make it explicit what you want to do. Okay, so that's the and the or and the not Boolean operators.